The powerful won't listen to the poor man. And so our identity cannot be found in people listening to us or trying to influence power. Our identity must be found in Jesus Christ.
Mm.
That transcends time, culture, place, and yet matters in place, matters to people, matters in time.
Welcome to the J29 podcast, hosting conversations for American pastors about politics and culture in their preaching, discipleship, and mentoring. Visit j29coalition.com for more information.
So before we get into this episode of the J29 podcast, I want to invite you, if you are a pastor or ministry leader, to join me and 25 other pastors for the 2026 J29 cohort. So this cohort is designed to equip pastors and ministry leaders to recapture the political imagination of the American evangelical church. We gather over the course of 3 months, in person twice, first at the beginning, then at the end, and then in between, once a week, we meet for coaching through Zoom with world-renowned scholars, missiologists, practitioners, pastors, leaders, to help coach us as we lead the congregations that we serve. You can find out more information at j29coalition.com. Andrew, thanks for being with us today. Just to give us a bit of context, where are you pastoring? How long you been pastoring there?
Yeah, so I'm pastoring in Marion, Indiana. We started this church in 2016, bought the building right in the center of our community. In 2015, we started the church in the fall of 2016, so we're celebrating 10 years this year.
Oh, that's cool, man. Congratulations. Where's Marion, for those of us not familiar?
Well, Marion is 60 miles northeast of Indianapolis, so we're right in between the two bigger cities in Indianapolis, or Indiana, Indianapolis and Fort Wayne. So Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, we're right in between both. And so north central Indiana is what some people call it. But yeah, so we're a small city, 30,000 people, right in between, over 1 million people in Indianapolis, and I think probably 300,000 people in Fort Wayne. And so we're 30,000 people here.
Yeah.
And so it's a small city, rural community kind of. It's got this urban rural synergy, I call it, because it is by means of, we talk about urban bridges, alleys we talk about urban that way. There's diversity here as well. And yet 2 miles in any direction, we're in the country. There's cornfields, a lot of corn in Indiana.
As you're pastoring and have pastored over the last 10 years, especially in a rural urban setting.
Yeah.
And thinking about the last 10 years being so kind of culture war-ish as it relates to politics.
Yeah.
How have you found yourself needing to navigate and shepherd your people over these last 10 years in that context?
Yeah. I think, for one, I love history. And so as much as we would like to think that these are new issues, the reality is I was raised in the Black church. And I think part of the language and the understanding in the Black church is what we're facing is nothing new in the Black church. I think for white Christians who haven't been exposed to the Black church or who have kind of been jaded by their privilege, I think this is a bigger thing. And maybe also there could be people of color who move towards affluence that can kind of feel like they're removed from some of this and maybe have forgotten or not understood some of the roots. But I think for me, understanding history in the Black church and Black church tradition in America, I tell our people that this is nothing new for Black folks. So that's the lens that I often share. Now, we have a very diverse congregation. I would say 65% of our church is white. And so we have African Americans, Latinos, biracial, and we have a lot of college students from 2 universities that come here as well. And so then we have an Asian population, Latino, Black, and there's also some other groups that come here. And so these are some of the ways that I navigate this, is by first and foremost saying that this is nothing new. And so it might be new to us, but in terms of history in America, this is nothing new
Hmm.
for African American people. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I share and start with, in terms of political challenges, having to navigate political injustice, oligarchy, I should say, of people who are abusing power on either side of the political spectrum, and always trying to find a space where I tell our people, like, I think that we're dealing in the political terrain, we're dealing with two groups of wealthy white people, and the rest of us are either commodities or casualties.
Hmm.
And so depending upon where you fall, you're a commodity or a casualty. So I start there. I also talk about the history of Israel and the history of
Hmm.
the church, and the church and the faithful people, the remnant that God preserves throughout history, finds ways to navigate faithfully in these kinds of political times where it seems like, it's suppressive, it's unjust, it's also this misaligned and perverted version of the Christian faith, that is enmeshed in this. And like, there's been history, there's kings, who were unjust, who use religion, lots of kings throughout Israel history who use religion or got away from what they once believed and begin to worship the idols around them. And
Hmm.
so we're no different. We just find ourselves here in this moment, in this time, and God is calling us to be a faithful people in this time. And so I think for me, looking back in history, so preaching through the book of Ecclesiastes, this is life under the sun, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Oppression's real. It's going to be here. Injustice is going to be here. And yet, in the midst of this, we're called to eat, drink, be merry, to preach the gospel, to speak truth, even though we know that power won't listen, right? The poor man could have saved the city if they had to listen to him. And we also know that the powerful won't listen to the poor man. And so our identity cannot be found in people listening to us or trying to influence power. Our identity must be found in our identity in Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
That transcends time, culture, place, and yet matters in place, matters to people, matters in time, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that's history is important to me and how I navigate this with people. And so again, we're in a multiracial church, so we have white folks that have education. We got black folks who have education. We have white folks who also come from poverty. We have black folks that come from poverty and struggle. We have Latinos. We have immigrants, who are facing some things, and so depending upon where you come from, you have to meet people where they're at. But people have to understand history.
Yeah. So good. You've been shepherding for the last decade in a contentious season. One of the things that comes up frequently is race, racism, ethnocentrism. And in a multi-ethnic, multiracial congregation, what wisdom would you have for us? Maybe you're talking to a younger pastor who's like, man, this is, we've not addressed this in our congregation, but I want to address it and I want to address it well. What coaching would you give to that younger pastor?
I think Scripture speaks to the human tendency. I think one of the things that we have to be very clear on when we address anything, racism, classism, sexism, ableism, whatever isms that you want to throw out there, one of the things that we have to be clear on is that prior to the fall, I mean, there was this beautiful flourishing of humanity and interdependent relationships prior to the fall. And so our theology has to begin in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, the very good life, God's very good intention. So we have to start our theology in Genesis 1 and 2. The fall, Genesis 3:16, there's a fall, and God kind of gives a description on the fall. And one of the things that God says, God doesn't prescribe this. This is not a prescription drug, although it feels like it at times because of what we're facing. But God describes this problem now is that humans will begin to rebel and exercise power. He says that to the woman, you will desire you will desire, right, your husband, and he will rule over you. Well, this is a human issue. Man, female, male, black, white, brown, rich, poor, middle class, various different abilities and disabilities. I mean, this is now a human problem. And so one of the things about sin is it continues to be creative and evolve and find different ways to play the same game. And so we're just talking about the ways in which humanity, out of fear, out of scarcity, out of not believing that God is good enough and God is big enough and has enough for us all, what we end up doing out of fear is now I got to take yours in order to get mine. Yeah. So we can do that individually in our relationships. We can see it in our families, our marriages, our siblings, very early. This is a human problem, first of all, right? Before this idea of race, this is only a few hundred years old. Humans got a problem. And we don't trust God. And so then since I don't trust God, what you got, I got to have too, because I'm not sure we're both gonna have enough for both of us. So I got to get yours and mine. And this is just a problem. And so you see it in patriarchy, in the way in which men live with women or try to exercise power over women. There's this jockeying for position, oligarchy in humanity. This is our problem. And so here it's racism, and racism is like the false gospel throughout the world. It's all over the world. We have a couple here from Kenya, Chip and Debbie, Chariot B. And one of the things that I think is also important to this discussion is the global reality. Yeah. And I talk about racism in America, and my brother Chip, who's an elder in our church, he says, Pastor, this is a global problem. And so I'm reminded, and so I've gone to Kenya. I've seen the way it happens there, how colonialism and post-colonialism in Kenya is still showing up in those tea fields with these contracts that England had with these companies owned by the British that have, and the Kenyans can't even really benefit from their own land because they're still subjected to these contracts, and then they get sold to another company who's not Kenyan. And so you think about the Congo, and you think about the way people are being exploited in the Congo for what we use to charge our cell phones. You think about, what's happening in Venezuela with oil, and I've been to Honduras. And so oppression throughout the world looks the same wherever you go, and however it shows up, right? In poverty, in crime, violence, drug use, people trying to cope and numb life. People don't have enough. And then you have this overabundance for people who have more than what they even need. Tribalism is a real thing in Africa. And so here in America, racism is very prevalent, but it's not just here, it's all over the world. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes I think we can centralize America as if America is somehow this anomaly that's detached from the rest of the world. And I think one of the things that we need to remember is that we are humans across the globe, and it still shows up across the globe in different ways, right? You think about even the history of America before the British and the French were fighting here, they were fighting over there, right? And so you think about the history of the European wars. Europeans were fighting in Europe before, and then they just came across the land and started fighting over here. And then they wanted the land, and then got the indigenous people in it and said, "Oh, here's some free labor. We want to profit more money. Let's take this group of people." But they had poor Europeans first for 70 years. The first 70 years of American history, they took the dregs of Europe. They were already fighting in Europe. They took the Irish, my family on my father's side. You think about German, Irish, English, the poor English, right? You think about these people, and they take these people, lock them up, then send them over here to work tobacco fields in Jamestown, Virginia. And then for 70 years they do that. It's like, oh, here's these 20 enslaved people that show up. Let's just put them right underneath the European peasants who are over here working, and let's give them a little bit of power and make them feel special, and they can oppress them. And the whole time the rich are benefiting, right? The monarch, they're over in England. The king's sitting back with his feet up, reaping all the spoil and the benefits of other people's labor. And this is the problem of humanity. So this is a human problem. This is what sin does. Yes, it is sin. And it's important to understand that sin is not just individualistic. When you get a lot of sinners together, a lot of sinners create a lot of problems that show up in systemic ways, such as racism, classism, sexism, or any other ism. And yet, if if humans will also heed to the Spirit of God, humans can also do a lot of systemic good.
Yeah.
But there's got to be
That's good.
something very clear. There's only one Lord, one faith, one baptism. It can't be two lords. It can't be Jesus and Caesar. It can't be Jesus and any political leader throughout history of any country. It can't be Trump. It can't be whoever you want to put them there. Democrat, it don't matter to me. But they can all get it. It don't matter to me because it ain't Jesus and anybody else, and that's our problem. So that, again, that's the idolatry. Jesus, now God is, Yahweh told Israel you didn't need a king, and so
That's
the people
good.
selected Saul.
Yeah.
And God selected David, and he wasn't perfect. So humans, there's a human problem that we have to talk about. And I think what we often do is we center America so much to where even centering America in such a way almost makes America a god. When in reality, this is a human problem throughout the world. Now, racism, we got to talk about and address because it is, but this is a human problem throughout the world. And we need to get out and have opportunity or see or listen to the church, to the voices of the global church, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens is even in injustice, we center America in such a way to where it's still an idol.
You're inviting us when we're looking at some of these hot topics, some of these acute problems. You're inviting us to take a broader perspective, look historically, take the long view, look globally, right? Take the wide view. And yet, the congregation that you're serving is in Marion, Indiana, where that scope and that breadth of wisdom is brought to bear Monday through Sunday.
Yeah.
How do you pastor folks on the ground as it relates to engaging these issues?
Yeah. So here locally, people who move here, people who live here, and there's people who are here that don't even understand what's happened here. One of the things that we do is a prayer walk in our neighborhood. We used to do them quarterly. Now we do them once in the spring, once in the fall. And we'll get a group of people and we will walk through the neighborhood. And I will begin I will show people places and spaces where violence has occurred to the land, to the geography of this place throughout history. I'll talk about this neighborhood. 100 years ago, this neighborhood was a flourishing white community. And there was this thing called the Second Great Migration, where over 5 million African Americans from the South came north. And right here in this neighborhood in Central Marion, right here in this place, when black folks from the South came up, I'm talking about Quakers who have this great abolitionist history, right? The first fringe church of Marion, this big, beautiful building. They had a parsonage. They had an apartment complex. They built a park. This is just one, right? But there's multiple churches. Lutherans, they all got it. I mean, they all did it. Pentecostals, my white Pentecostal sisters, they did it too, right? In this neighborhood, these churches that are now black churches, 60, 70 years ago, they were white churches. And what happened? What happened? I can tell you what happened. Black folks from the South moved into the neighborhood because of industry boom and jobs and the gospel of these white churches. Their gospel was not big enough to hold black and white folks together. And so what happened was, because their gospel wasn't big enough, they left. In this small community, they went out north. They did it through the city and through the county, area planning. They go and they begin at David Swanson's book, Plundered. He talks about this idea of exploitation and extraction. And so what do they do? Area planning, geography. Dr. Willie James Jennings talks about how the church ought to be at area planning meetings, how the church ought to show up at city council meetings, how Christians have a responsibility to think about the geography, the place in which the harm has been done, and what does it mean to be a people to be repairers of the breach in that land, in that place, as Isaiah talks about, Isaiah 61. And so they took the land out north, and they got through the area planning. They got the city water to take them out, to go out there and they built these new church buildings, and they built these new communities, these new neighborhoods in the 60s and 70s. Put money into parks, more money into parks. And then they would build these neighborhoods. And then they're talking about in the 60s and 70s and in the 80s, they were still abiding by this. That said, I've got the documents that this neighborhood is for the pure white race only. And if you were black or Hispanic, you were there working for someone and you had to be out of the neighborhood by 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And then when they left, they just left. They didn't like fix their houses up and leave. They just left and then abandoned the neighborhood, which is where we're at now. And so I give people like I help people to think about where they live and why do they live there. And people who are from Marion that don't understand this history is like, oh, now I remember. Yeah, the Catholic Church used to be a few blocks away. And then all of a sudden it moved out north and all this development out north. Why did that happen? Well, this is what I'm talking about. Systemic racism, redlining. Who could get loans in what neighborhoods, putting people, intentionally into particular neighborhoods. This is done, and many Christians were doing this, right? These are churches. I'm taking you. Where this church here in 1965, this church was right here in this neighborhood, and it is 2026. Google right now the church in Marion. Now, where are they at? Oh, they're out there on State Road 15. Oh, what's that tell you, right? So, what does it mean to be a church? To be Christians in this time and in this place, to say we're going to be people who work to restore this narrative, to repair the brokenness. And so that means addressing the challenges in your neighborhood. You think about parks. And so one of the things that we did right here locally in our neighborhood, there were 3 parks at one point in time in this neighborhood, 3 parks. Predominantly black families. You have some white families in this neighborhood as well, and Hispanic families. And no parks. And so one of the things that we did with another church in this community, a white church, we came together and worked through what's something that would be good for our neighborhood, a park. Now, this church was a white church that they built like this, $10, $15 million sanctuary 25 years ago. And there was a park on the south side of town that people played basketball in all the time. They used. And when they built the sanctuary, they didn't even ask the community nothing. They just tore it down, put up this big sanctuary, and the church doors faced the university, not the community. Right? And so like now I don't think that they intentionally we want to, it's just ignorance, right? And they want to, these are my brothers and sisters in Christ. I love them. And so, but we got to be people who can tell the truth about this.
Yeah.
And so truth telling is also part of this, laying out geographical history of our church, of our neighborhood. Now, there's people who don't live in our neighborhood. There's people who live in our neighborhood who are part of our church. But it's important that we understand our neighborhood and we're committed to our neighborhood. And so you might drive in here and you might live in a different neighborhood. You might live in a more affluent neighborhood. But as a church, we are committed to the geography of where our church is at. I live in the neighborhood. Multiple people live in the neighborhood. So what does it mean to be people? So we call people to think about what it means to be people who are part of restorative justice and reconciliation right here in the ground in our neighborhood.
Yeah, that's
so those good. Are some practical ways of how I disciple our church to think about this. Having a parish mentality, right? And I think part of upward mobility, it kind of just moves you out of the neighborhoods and moves you into other places. And again, I'm not knocking people who live in the burbs. Right? I'm not saying that you're evil or you're bad, but what I am saying is, or churches that are in the burbs. But if you're a church in the burbs, you ought to be partnering with a church in the inner city, and you ought to be listening and learning and supporting and partnering, and it shouldn't be tokenism, right? Now, everybody don't have to live in the hood, but there's also rural communities. So we also have rural poverty here. And you think about trailer parks or abandoned houses in the country where you think about meth and heroin, and it's also these rural areas. And so we have all of this, right? We got all of this in this little place. We have urban poverty. We got rural poverty. And so, and the largest group of people in America and the largest group of people in our community who actually, in terms of numbers, that are struggling, that are impoverished, are white. And yet somehow, some way, the picture in America of poverty is a single black woman who's got 4 or 5 kids. Somehow she becomes the mascot for this. But in terms of numbers, right? And so, like, how do we even talk about these things and talk about the disparities, the ratio? Okay, the numbers are white, and yet the ratio is black and brown. So why is it that there's less black folks that have a higher ratio of disparity than white people? That's racism. That's not just like, this is not just coincidence.
Right.
This is structural racism in American history. And so we got to talk about this.
Yeah, that's good.
We have a historian in our congregation, Dr. Rusty Hawkins. He wrote a book called The Bible Told Him So, how Southern white evangelicals kind of upheld racism and slavery, right? And so every couple of years, Rusty does a 3 to 6 week class where he talks about the anti-racist history of America. And this is a white guy who teaches at the Honors College here at Indiana Wesleyan University, right? He's from Kansas, mentored by Michael Emerson, and he's a real gift to our church. And so tangible ways, and Rusty as a white male, he's doing his work, right? He's doing his part. And so I think that those are some tangible ways history is important. We're reading the same Bible.
Yeah.
But I think understanding how to integrate it and to exegete our neighborhoods into the scriptures.
You've invited us to think, when we're coming up against these issues of sin and systemic evil, to think historically, to think globally, but also historically in our own context. I love your invitation for us to think about the story of the place in which we serve and minister. You know, there's 10,000 things that are unique about your context, different than mine, and yet there's also some similarities. Yeah. And so learning from one another, I hope that one of the takeaways for us is to be curious about your own community. One of the phrases we use here in Phoenix is to exegete the city. You know, whatever community we've been called to is to learn from it, but also to tease out the truth that's there that we may not see on first glance. And that takes a level of intention and a level of care, just like exegesis from the text. So I'm wondering, you mentioned in your context, 30,000 folks, rural and urban, and then now there's this kind of suburban region or ring where there's churches in suburban areas, rural, urban. And you mentioned partnering together to meet these needs. Just as we kind of conclude our time together, how can we be thinking about partnering with churches that are in our general area, but are maybe in a different context, maybe, urban to rural or rural to suburban? What coaching would you give to us on partnering with other churches in slightly different contexts?
Yeah. I would say that one of the ways that we need to do is we need to make sure that we're intentional about, there's humility. You have to have humility in entering these relationships. Yeah. Which means that you got to see people as equals. And so with that, what does someone else have to offer you? And you got to spend some time. So I would say I would spend time with a church or a group of Christians in a different neighborhood who are completely different from yours for a while. I would spend some time eating, listening. And if you're someone who has probably some economic resources and power, that's a power game. We can sit here and act like, no, it's power, right? Now, there's different forms of power, but we're ignorant if we don't recognize the way in which power is honored or respected, although it's not necessarily the kingdom of God economy. It's the economy of the world. But I would almost say that there needs to be some humility in learning from the other church or other churches. Now, there's got to be mutuality in this. Everybody has something to offer. But I would say that just storytelling, listening, spending time together. What are your values? What do you love? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What is your life? I think spending time just getting to know each other in a mutually honoring way would be the first thing. No, we're not moving towards anything. First and foremost, we got to learn how to love you and treat you as equals. And we don't get close to anybody that we don't think's an equal. The only people in our lives that we really submit to are people that we think are equals. And so there has to be a way in which we spend some time with each other, listening and realizing our common humanity together. That we all have hopes, we all have dreams, we all breathe the same air. There's difference, and the difference is not bad necessarily. And I would say I would start there. No agenda other than getting to know each other. We don't have to move towards no mission. We don't have to go do nothing. Let's just spend time together in mutually honoring ways. And then from there, begin to pray and discern what are the gifts that different congregations have. Doing some asset-based community development, even amongst the congregations. What are the assets, right? Let's not, and we can, the economic resources can be part of it, but it doesn't have to be. I would even start somewhere else, because there's other things, right? In terms of knowing history in the neighborhood, knowing history in the community, knowing people in the community, right? There's other ways that we can understand assets that we have to begin to get creative with, and identifying, okay, yeah, there's preaching, there's resilience, there's hope, there's discipleship, there's evangelism, identifying the different gifts in the different bodies and saying, okay, let's name a few of these things and how to begin to work and maybe even cross-train, cross-develop each other's people, right?
Yeah.
I would say starting with something like that would be helpful. But part of the problem that I see is that this is a big challenge. That churches that don't have the money have no problem being able to identify, because there's already humility that exists.
Yeah.
But churches that have the money, they still have a hard time being able to identify the gifts in churches with smaller economic resources.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's a challenge, because it's like, this church has been surviving this long with fewer economic resources. Have you ever thought about like resilience as a gift?
Yeah.
Perseverance as a gift?
Yeah.
And how do you learn perseverance from a church that has been persevering and even flourishing in difficult times while your congregation's over there losing their crap?
Yep.
Right?
Preach, man. Yeah.
And because you talked about conservative, there was a white conservative pastor who, through sexuality issues that were arising in the church. I come from the Black church. We've always been hospitable, and yet there's always been this way in which pastors would speak about sexuality from the pulpit, would talk about it, and they're like, all this stuff's going on. It's like, man, this is when the Methodist Wesleyan church was going through things, and they're like, what's the Black church? I said, well, this is not an issue in the Black church. He's like, what? I said, for one, Black people are typically pretty just hospitable, because we understand what oppression and othering feels like. And so if you go to Black churches, you're going to find people in the church from the LGBTQIA plus community. And yet the church still holds to a historical sexual ethic. This is not like a big issue. And he looked at me and he was like, huh? Like, yeah. So how does, like, that's and it's not that doesn't matter. No, we need to, because there's also ways in which we need to talk about these things too, right?
Right.
And there's ways that we can grow in talking about these. But like, the thing that you're over here like all up in the air about is like, that's not really a big thing for us. So I think about these kinds of things, like, why is it that some churches are in an uprising about this? Oh, it's a big thing for white Christians, but for the last 300 years, Black Christians have been talking about the same thing, and now it's a big thing. Now,
yeah, you're inviting us to embrace the biblical call to mutuality and reciprocity. That, as Grandma used to say, all ground is equal at the foot of the cross. So whatever your congregational budget is or size, that there's mutuality and the reciprocity, that we give gifts to each other, that those with bigger budgets can sometimes give financial gifts, but those are not the only gifts. In fact, they're not the most important gifts. The wisdom and the perseverance of those who have perhaps had to suffer more or go without are also really profound gifts, and we get to give each other gifts as we think about engaging the needs of our communities. We are also doing it as part of an ecosystem that God has placed in Marion, Indiana, Phoenix, Arizona, wherever it might be.
Yeah.
And there's a shared wisdom in the ecosystem of the church. And I love that you're inviting us to think deeply about how that ecosystem might be, to use your term, an asset as we minister in divisive times. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, brother. Where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, so I'm on Substack, Drew Morrell 81. I'm on Substack. I'm starting to write a little bit more. You can look us up, Real Community Covenant com or Facebook, Real Community Covenant Church in Marion, Indiana. I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well. I've kind of limited some of my time on there, but I'm still there to practice presence more with people.
Love it. Thanks, brother.
Blessings to you, man.